So in this video, we're going to be talking about fraction, decimal, percent conversions. And one thing we use to help us with that is FDP, where F stands for fraction, D stands for decimal, and P stands for percent. And in class, we've already talked about how you go from a fraction to decimal. If you remember at the beginning of the year, we said that when you need to change a fraction to a decimal, you're actually dividing, and we call that TIBO, top in, bottom out, to help us remember how to divide. And then we also talked about how you would change a decimal to a fraction. And when you change a decimal to a fraction, you're going to write it like you say it. All right, so if we did an example with a fraction and a decimal, one that we're already pretty familiar with, if we started with, let's say, 1/2, and we wanted to change that to a decimal, we know that we could do top in, bottom out, change it like that. Or some of you already know that that's equal to 0.5. And what we're saying is that 1/2 is the same thing as 0.5. It's just a different form, a different way to write that number. Well, percents are a third way you can write 1/2 or 0.5. And percent is just means out of 100. All right, so if we are trying to do half of 100, how much would that be? It would be 50, right? Or if you do use this all the time, probably when you go to the store, if something is half off, you already know that that's going to equal 50%. All right, so how can we get from, let's say, a fraction to a decimal to a percent? Well, if you notice that there's a 5 here and a 5 here, and basically all that happens when you change a decimal to a percent is because you're doing it out of 100, you're just moving that decimal over 2 places. So if I move the decimal 2 places, I can see that I would need to add a 0 there, and that would give me the 50%. Same thing if you're changing a percent to a decimal. My decimal's back here. If I want to change it to a decimal, I'm going to move it 2 places over here, and the decimal goes in front. So to get from a decimal to a percent, what we're going to remember is that we need to move the decimal 2 places. And if we're going decimal to percent, we're going to move it that direction to the right. If we're going percent to decimal, then we're going to move the decimal to the left 2 places. All right, so let's just practice using that. So again, here you have FDP. If it helps, just sort of give yourself some hints here. Divide here, we're going to say it maybe. And here, we're going to use 2 places. All right, so the first way, fraction to decimal, that's when I'm going F to D. All right, so F to D is dividing or TIBO. So let's say I'm just going to use the fraction 7/20. If I want to change it to a decimal, I'm going to divide 20 into 7. Okay, can't do that. Add decimal and a 0. So 20 will go into 70 3 times. 3 times 20 is 60. When I subtract, I get 10, and I bring down another 0. So 20 will go into 100 5 times. So I can see that 7/20 is really the same thing as 0.35. All right, if I want to go decimal to percent, then I'm going, again, this direction, decimal to percent. So I'm going to follow the arrows. When I go decimal to percent, I'm going to move a decimal 2 places to the right. So if I just go back to the decimal I was already using, 0.35, and I move it 2 places to the right, then what I end up with is 35%. So 0.35 is the same thing as 35%, which is also the same thing as 7/20. All right, if I want to go fraction to percent, okay, this time I'm going from F to P. And notice that I have to go from F through D to get to P. So I'm going to need to do 2 steps in order to get to the percent. So first thing I'm going to do is change a fraction to a decimal and then change it to a percent. So let's say I'm going to use the fraction 2/5. To change a fraction to a decimal, I'm dividing top in, bottom out. I can't divide 5 into 2, so I add my decimal and bring it up. Add my 0, 5 will go into 24 times. All right, so 2/5 is the same thing as 0.4. And now I still need to change 0.4 into a percent. So to get from decimal to percent, 2 places to the right. So this time I'm going to have to add a 0 here in order to move it 2 places. So 2/5 is 40%, and 40% is also 0.4. All right, So let's look at how we would get from a decimal to a fraction. Right, so decimal to fraction down here, this time I'm going decimal to fraction, but this time I'm going this way, right? So I can say that when I go from decimal or D to F, I need to write it like I say it. So let's say I start with this number, 0.8. I really don't say that. That's not really the correct way to say it. I really should be saying 8/10, okay, which means I could write it as 8/10, and then I would need to simplify it. So both of these are divisible by 2. So 0.8 or 8/10 is really equal to 4/5 as a fraction. All right, if I want to go from a percent to a decimal, okay, this time I'm going this direction from the P to the D. So this time I'm moving to the left, and I might start with something like 0.42, or I'm sorry, 42%. But I want to change it to a decimal, all right? So percent to decimal. This time I'm moving to the left. My decimal starts in the back, and I move it over 2 places. So 42% is the same thing as 0.42. All right, and then the last one, this one I want to go from percent to fraction. So I might be starting with something like 12%. I want to change it to a fraction. When I do this, okay, notice which way you're going. I have to go from percent through the decimal in order to get to the fraction. All right, so I'm kind of working my way backwards. So percent to decimal, I'm moving it 2 places. This time I'm moving it to the left, starting at the back, moving it 2 places. That would be 0.12. Then, if I keep going, decimal to fraction, I'm writing it like I say it. So this would be 12 hundredths. And then this can still be simplified. These are both divisible by 4. So 12 divided by 4 is 3. 100 divided by 4 is 25. So 3/25. 12% is the same thing as 3/25. All right, so that's how you use FDP. We're going to do some examples here. So again, if you think you've got it and you want to pause the video and see if you can get the right answers and then restart it to check and see if you did, that'd be a great idea. All right, so let's look at the first one. We're changing 7/9 into a percent. Okay, so if I'm going from a fraction to percent, I have to go through D. So the first step is to divide and change it to a decimal. So top in, bottom out, I'm dividing 9 into 7. Okay, can't do that. Add my decimal. My 0, 9, I'll go into 70, and let's see, 9 times 6, no, 7. 9 times 7 is 63. When I subtract, I get 7, and I'm going to bring down another 0, so 9, I'll go into 7 times. All right, so I can see that this is repeating. All right, so 7/9 is the same thing as 0.7, 7, and it's repeating. I'm going to write it like that because I know that to make it now into a percent, I have to move it 2 places to the right. All right, so when I move it 2 places, all right, so if this were written like 0.7 repeating like that, and I move it 2 places to the right, normally I add zeros here when I need to move something, but because it's repeating the 7, it's actually the 7 that's repeating. So I'm going to write this, or I can see it here too, as 77.7%. With the 7, it's going to continue to repeat because that's what it means to be repeating decimal. So I moved it over 2 places, but I'm going to keep the repeating part there. All right, and changing 45% to a fraction. So this one time I'm starting with the P and I'm working my way backwards. So I start by changing 45% into a decimal. All right, so P to D means I'm going to move it to the left 2 places. So that would be 0.45. And then I want it to change it to a fraction. So to change a decimal to a fraction, I write it like I say it. So this would be 45 hundredths. I'm going to write that as 45/100 and then simplify it if I can. These are both divisible by 5. This would be 9/20. That would be the answer here. All right, and then the last example, 250%. If I'm going to change that into a fraction, I'm going to start with the percent and work my way backwards. So 250%, I'm going to start in the back, and I need to move it 2 places. And notice it's always 2 places. I have 3 numbers here. I have something greater than 100%, but I still always move my decimal 2 places. So this becomes 2.50 or 2.5 as a decimal. And then to write it as a fraction, this is, I write it like I say it. So I would say 2 and 5/10. So the 2 is still my whole number. The 5/10 is my fraction. This is a mixed number. And then I would want to simplify this. So these are both divisible by 5. So this becomes 2 and 1/2. Right? So, right. And just, we didn't include this on here, but as a quick, just little thought, you can also have, just like you can have percents greater than 100, you can also have percents that are less than 1. So you might start out with something like 2.3%. And if you have to change that to a decimal, okay, there is a decimal here, but changing it to a decimal requires you to move it 2 places. Always 2 places, only 2 places. So I still move it. Which direction am I going? P to D. I'm still going to move it 2 places. So this time I get 0.023, right? And then as a fraction, 0.23 would be 23 thousandths, okay, because the 3's in the thousands place. All right, so we're going to continue to use FDP and apply it when we're ordering rational numbers. So a rational number is pretty much all your positive and negative integers, your fractions and your decimals, and even your percents. All right, so it says in the directions that we need to change everything to the same type of number. And then if we're working with decimals, we may have to add zeros if we need to. And so you can change everything to a fraction, you can change everything to a decimal, or you can change everything to a percent. And normally people don't change everything to fractions because that seems to be harder, and they would all need a common denominator when you put them in order. So usually people will change everything to either a percent or to a decimal. All right, so let's just get started. I know that I'm going to change my fractions because I don't want to work with common denominators right now. So to change a fraction to a decimal, I'm going to divide 20 into 3. I can't do that, so I'm going to add my decimal and my 0. 20 will go into 30 once, and when I subtract, I get 10. Bring down another 0. 20 will go into 100 5 times. So this is 0.15. All right, so I'm just going to try to keep it all organized over here. So I know that 3/20, I'll do it over here. 3/20 was 0.15, and as a percent, because I'm going to practice with my percents, I'm going to move it over 2 places and make it 15%. All right, I can see that I have 0.05. If I'm going to change it to a percent, I move it 2 places, so this would be 5%. 18% is already a percent, so I don't need to change it. 1.8, if I'm going to change it to a percent, I have to move it 2 places, which means this time I'm going to have to add a 0, so 180%. And then I have a fraction here, so I'm going to change my fractions into decimals. 9 won't go into 50, or 9. Oh, I'm doing this wrong. Top in, bottom out, sorry. 50 won't go into 9. Add your decimal, bring it up, and your 0. 50 will go into 90 one time. I subtract, I get 40. Bring down another 0. 50 will go into 48 times. All right, so that tells me that I have 1 9/50, which would be the same thing. Don't forget to include your whole number, 1.18. As a percent, that's going to be moved over 2 places, so 118%. And the last one is 4%. All right, so I'm supposed to order these least to greatest. So I'm going to start with the smallest percent, which looks like 4% here. So that's my first thing. And then after 4% would be 5%, which actually started off as 0.05. So I'm going to rewrite it like that. And after 5% looks like 15% would be next. 15% started off as 3/20, so I'm going to go ahead and rewrite it that way. 18% would be next. It was already a percent. After 18%, it looks like 118%, which started off as 1 9/50. And then my last one would be 180%, which began as 1.8. So this is my list of numbers in order. All right, so let's try again. You're ordering least to greatest. I'm going to start by changing those fractions into decimals. So if I divide 25 into 9, that won't happen. So I add my decimal, my 0, 25 will go into 93 times. I subtract 75. I get 15, bring down another 0, 25 will go into 156 times. All right, so I have 9/25. That's the same thing as 0.36. And I'm going to change it to a percent to get 36%. All right, 0.7. I can change that to a percent really easily by adding a 0, so that's 70%. 0.364. I need to move it, again, just 2 places, so this time there's still a decimal. 36.4%. 72%, that's already a percent. I don't have to change anything. 7 6/15 means I need to use typo. So I can't divide 15 into 6. Add your decimal, bring it up, add your 0. 15 will go into 64 times. All right, so 7 6/15 is the same thing as 7.4. If I move it 2 places, that's 740%. And this is already a percent, so 7.2% is my next thing. All right, so if I'm going to put these in order least to greatest, my smallest percent, 36, 70, 36, 72, 740, 7.2. My smallest percent is 7.2%, and that's what it started as. Okay, after 7.2%, looks like I have 36 and 36.4. So if I'm not sure which one should come next, I can make this 36.0. And then it's obvious that 36% would come next. So this is 9 over 25. And 36.4% would come next. So that was 0.364 originally. All right, and then I'm going to jump up to 70%, which started as 0.7. And then 72%, which was already a percent. And then the last one is 740%, which started off as 7 6/15. All right, so that's least to greatest. Pay attention to what it says, because sometimes they switch it, make it greatest to least, and so I would just reverse the order in that case. All right, and here's another example. 85%, that's already a percent, so I don't need to change anything. This one is $8.23, so it's just another way to write a decimal, but I'm still can change it to a percent. So I'm starting with 8.23. To change it to a percent, I move it over 2 places. So this is still 823%. 8 2/3, that's my fraction. So top in, bottom out. Add your decimal, bring it up, add your 0. 3 will go into 26 times. All right, and I can see that this is going to be repeating. All right, so this one is 8 2/3. I can rewrite it as 8.6 repeating, but to move my decimal place 2 places, I'm going to have to add not a 0 this time, but a 6, so 866, and I'm going to show that it's going to continue to repeat. So 86.6 and then, or 866.6 repeat percent. And then I see 8.5%. I don't need to change that one. 0.84. If I move it 2 places, I get 84%. 8 200. So I'm going to be dividing. 100 won't go into 2, so add a decimal and a 0. 100 won't go into 20, so I need to put a 0 here before I add another 0. 100 will go into 200 now 2 times. All right, so 8 200ths is the same thing as 8.02, and if I move my decimal place 2 places, 802%. And the last one is 0.08. If I move it 2 places, I get 8%. All right, so put these in order least to greatest. I'm looking for my smallest percent. So I have, these are pretty big, 8.5% and 8%. So which would be smaller, 8% or 8.5? Now I could rewrite this as 8.0%, and then I can see it's smaller. So 0.08 is what it started as, and then 8.5%. All right, so then I'm going to look for the next largest percent, and it looks like I have 84 and 85% here. So 84 would come first, 0.84, and then 85%. And now I have percents that are 800 or more. So the smallest percent that I have left is 802%, and it started off as 8 200ths. And then these two are left, so 823% would be next. That was 8.23. The last one is 866, which is 8 2/3. All right, so there's least to greatest again. And then in this last example, I have some negative numbers. I'm going to treat these just the same as how I've done things in the past. So negatives are going to come before positives, and negatives tend to get smaller as they approach 0. All right, so the larger the negative, the smaller the number, the least its value. All right, so I have negative 40%. So since this is already a percent, I don't need to change it. 730%, also a percent, don't need to change it. Negative 46, all right? So to change negative 46 into a percent, I need to move my decimal over 2 places. All right, so where is the decimal? It's back here. So when I move it over 2 places, I'm going to have add 2 zeros. This becomes negative 4,600%. It's kind of a big percent. All right, don't lose the negative, and don't forget, you still always move your decimal 2 places when you're changing a even a whole number to a percent. All right, so negative 21/50ths, dividing 50 into 21. 50 won't go into 21. Add your decimal with places. Add your 0. 50 will go into 210 4 times. I'm going to have 10 left over. Bring down another 0. 50 will go into 100 2 times. All right. So I can say that negative 21/50ths is the same thing as negative 0.42. And then as a percent, I still need to move my decimal over 2 places. So I'm going to make sure to keep the negative and change this to negative 42%. All right. Then I have 7.03. Need to change that to a percent. Becomes 703%. And then this one, 0.45 as an absolute value. Remember, the absolute value is just how far is it from 0. So 0.45, the absolute value is still just 0.45. It's positive. In my class, we said if you go into prison, you have to come out positive. And then I still, because it's a decimal, need to change it to percent. So I'm going to move it 2 places, make this 45%. All right, so let's put them in order. I have negative 40%, negative 4,600%, negative 42%. I'm going to start with my negatives because I know negatives come before positives. So which of these is the most negative? Well, this one is very negative. Negative 4,600%. It started off as negative 46, so it comes first. And then negative 40 and negative 42%. My next most negative would be negative 42%. It started off as negative 21/50ths. Okay, then negative 40%. I didn't have to change that one. All right, and now I switch to positive numbers. And so I'm going to start with my smallest positive and then get larger. So of the positive numbers I have 730, 703, and 45. Well, 45 is smaller than 700. It started off as the absolute value of 0.45. And then of the 2 left, I have, 730 and 703. This one's smaller, so 7.03. My last one is 730%. Right? So that is least to greatest ordering rational numbers. Now, I could have changed everything to a decimal and then put them in order, but sometimes percents are just easier because it changes everything to more like a whole number, and sometimes it's easier to put numbers in order when we're not thinking about the decimals so much. But if you don't want to do that, you can change them all to decimals and try it that way. And then it's even possible to change everything to a fraction, although that's not very common. All right, well, good luck ordering rational numbers.